A pleasure to meet y'all at last, and welcome back to HJN Season 3. Okay, here we are again. This is Bandtastic. This is the last time that I'll ever be doing a Bandtastic episode. Today is August 30th, 2023. Man, just to know we're only 4 months away from being at that very end of this year, I'm kind of glad that we've done some great things throughout this whole year. We've had some amazing movies, we've had some pretty interesting things here on YouTube, and also some pretty insane things going on in real life. But hey, I've quit social media, so that's no longer going to be a burden in my life. And I'm sure to hope that from here on out, it never will. So, with that in mind, it's time to tackle one last band for this series. And I feel like you probably got an idea about it. If not, well, All American Rejects. Yeah. This was an Oklahoma-based band. So yeah, going back to American bands. These guys were formed all the way back in the year 2000. Yeah. Only 23-year time gap has pretty much passed. In contrast to most other American rock bands I've talked about, these guys are somewhat young in comparison. But they were in fact the first major rock band, at least in comparison to some like Bare Naked Ladies or Smash Mouth or even Bush. While All American Rejects took a little while to get to, I'm kind of glad that I managed to at least get to them at some point. As far back as the mid to late 2000s, especially when I started using iPods as a way to hold all of my favorite music. And well, 90 songs my first ever iPod ever held. And there were 3 of which that were on there that I really loved very much. And well, these singles in particular were released between 2002 and 2005. As we know, All American Rejects was founded primarily by a man named Tyson Ritter. A guy who was only 19 going on 20 at the time when he founded All American Rejects in Oklahoma. Wow. That's quite young to be able to found your own rock band. That's pretty crazy. Oh, but you know what though? Much like a lot of other bands I've talked about, as soon as they founded, it was go time for them. Their first piece of work came, believe it or not, with yet another self-titled album. And this one in particular was released in 2002, pretty much the same year as a number of other different things that went down, like the soundtrack to Treasure Planet, which itself was a 2002 Disney movie. Heavily obscured, but fairly loved by a lot of people. Anyways, though, what All American Rejects has pretty much an antique go-kart as a means of artwork for their first album in 2002. So that's a pretty good way to go. It has a lot of great songs on it too, like My Paper Heart, Swing Swing, The Last Song, Happy Endings, and Time Stands Still. So that's a pretty darn good way to start, since they did have some notable success from it. But their biggest success came from their second album, Move Along, in 2005. Here it is. This is basically the first instance of artwork where we actually get to see all 4 of the band members, including Tyson Ritter himself, which has that emo hair look to him. Not quite as awesome as some other people would, based on this known instance alone, but still. This was their best album yet. And Move Along, like their previous album, had amazing singles in it. Almost every single one of them was definitely worth a listen to at some point in life. And well, I could sure tell you from my own experiences that going from Dirty Little Secret to Can't Take It, all 12 of these singles were just unbelievable. And you know what though? Even after 12 singles with this album, and another dozen or so with the last one, well, it didn't really stop here, pretty much. Because in 2008, When the World Comes Down, yep, there's the artwork right there. It's pretty unique for what it is. But this is where they made their true success in 2008, especially with their single, Gives You Hell. Man. Just looking at the music video alone, even nowadays, 15 years later, wow. Yet another instance in life where the timing just so happens to be perfect in life for me to talk about certain things. But you know, I could find another timing is perfect deal that's even more epic than this. Has yet to happen, but you know what the point is though? When the World Comes Down, this was their true single, their biggest breakthrough they've possibly ever done, because even though Gives You Hell was the true top of the charts and also the top of all their works, even though nowadays when you Google it, it has since been overshadowed by a few other singles here and there. Don't know why. But the album itself does have a lot of great works in it as well, like Break In, The Wind Blows, Sunshine, which was a hidden track, as well as a demo called On the Floor. That's where I'm at. The simplicity in the tune with a combination of drums, tambourines, and acoustic guitar. Not to mention the harmony coming from a few of the members while Tyson lays down his sick lyrics. Oh man. This is where I've truly gotten my own inspiration. Not just to have my own kind of rock music implemented, mostly in the form of composition, since I can hardly get instruments of mine to work correctly. And on top of that, I have since liquidated all of my guitars, just to make ends meet. Yeah, it's a little sad when you think about it, but like I've said, these guys were a huge inspiration for me, and I'm sure that a lot of you out there might have heard about these guys, whether you've heard about their work on your own devices, or you've seen them live, or you have seen a stream of theirs. Doesn't really matter which it is. But you know what though? 3 albums, 3 major successes, 3 major paradigm shifts, and 3 awesome ways to go down in the history of rock and roll music in the 2000s. But guess what? They were actually able to carry on well into the 2010s. That's right. In 2012, they made an album called Kids in the Street, which, while it's certainly not as good as most of the other albums that they have done, it actually does have itself a nice way to go, especially with singles like Out the Door, Somebody's Gone, and my favorite of the bunch, Beekeeper's Daughter. So, I guess that's pretty much a good thing to do, but the fact that they weren't not as good as the other 3, it's almost like how some franchises have basically devolved at some point after a string of success had come through. I mean, look at the Psycho films. Psycho 1 was amazing, Psycho 2 was a critically underrated masterpiece of a sequel, and then there was the 3rd film, which didn't necessarily do that well, and then there was the 4th film, which surprisingly did even better than the other sequels, making it the best one. Second best, only behind the first. But then of course, you know what, even after 4 albums, they didn't necessarily make any full albums or limited play albums, or LP for short. In 2015, they released a single called There's a Place. This single was actually pretty good, a nice way for them to be able to make a comeback after Kids in the Street didn't really do all that well in comparison to the other 3 albums they made throughout the 2000s. But even after that, they didn't stop there. In 2017, they released a duo single, pretty much, called Sweat. A title called Sweat and a title called Close Your Eyes. They pretty much both came out in July of 2017. And alongside a few other works, including Passenger, and Shaman's Harvest, and even Rooney, you know, there were a lot of albums that I bought throughout 2017 through iTunes, or even downloaded straight off of YouTube during that time. But All American Rejects contributing with another single pretty much, or basically a duo single, less than 2 years after creating There's a Place, I guess it was pretty nice of them to be at least give us a chance that they were still around. But you know, even then they didn't necessarily do all that well. Sweat and Close Your Eyes sounded pretty well, but it didn't only do so well. Only so well. So basically the hunt for some future success was still underway. In 2019, they did it again. They made another duo single known as Send Her to Heaven, and then another single called Demons. It became a little more apparent though that explicit content was pretty much what they were attempting to achieve. Likely because of a few complications that went down with the band themselves. And the fact that they weren't getting as successful as they did more than 10 years ago, it probably did eventually lead to some squalls and a few disagreements here and there, even at a political level. That's honestly not a great way to go. A rock band that had relatively amazing success in the 2000s, now 10 years later finding themselves that they're not able to do as good as they did back then, it's basically gotten to the point where they haven't done that well anymore, and they're probably going to have no other choice but to eventually disband at some point. Which I feel like that since 2019 has been a consideration of theirs. Haven't really looked into them all that often, but I do get the feeling maybe it could be a wise idea for them to eventually part ways before something goes terribly wrong. You know what though? That's not going to mean anything. It's not going to change how I feel about them as a whole. It's not going to change how I feel about their work and how much success they made, how much money they've made, how many views on YouTube they've made, how many of anything that they made. Nothing is ever going to change how I feel about this band. It is the greatest band I've ever possibly listened to, and with a lot of other bands out there like Smash Mouth, Bush, All Time Low, Plain White T's, and a ton of others here and there, they did amazing work as well, and alt rock was the reason why music is still a big thing in my life. It's pretty much the only known good music I've ever found. Because since Michael Jackson's death, pop music has only done so well. Since James Brown's death, funk music has only been doing so well. And, you know, so that's just the problem I have. Alt rock is a thing that has been universally renowned. It's not just a single piece attributed to a single person. Unlike with Michael Jackson or James Brown, which they basically revolutionized the funk and pop industries, respectively, in their own way. Even though there may be a lot of other people out there whom have also made their own contributions to funk or pop, the many, many, many contributors to rock and roll, especially in recent years, when it seems that rock and roll is deliberately being shoved underneath the rug, buried underneath a few feet worth of dirt, to make way for so-called rap music. Like people ever give a crap about that anymore after 30 years of innovation? Like what happened? Either you hate it or you love it. There can never be both. That'd be like saying, should I be conservative or Democrat? Should I be good or evil? Should I be Harvard or Yale? Should I be doctor or lawyer? Should I be, oh man, carnivore or herbivore? I mean, all these things are different, but that's besides the point. We cannot have an in-the-middle thing going on between one side of an argument and the other. Only one side can get through, the other side victorious! All American Rejects, though, is still the greatest rock band ever. Forget Black Sabbath. Forget AC/DC, forget Guns N' Roses, forget all of that crap, because we're way ahead into the future. And Tyson Ritter, well now 40 plus years old, oh man, I'm sure he's still having himself quite a life out there, and a time to be alive. Well, much like how Fall Out Boy, Plain White T's, Bush, and Berlin, they've made more recent works. But I seriously don't know if All American Rejects is going to follow suit with their own work. Especially considering that their more recent work in the 2010s was not at all as good as what they did in the 2000s. But I still have hope for them. I still have a lot of commitment to them. I still have justification. Knowing that they could actually come back with something big. I mean, if all these other bands manage to make a comeback with their own works of any kind whatsoever, surely All American Rejects deserves a chance just the same, if not anything on par or better than the others. Well, that completes an epic chapter here in HJN history. And I will in fact be doing more of these sort of series that'll be directly in line with HGN itself. But throughout the remainder of Season 3, which I plan on continuing until New Year's Day 2024, we're going to have a lot more work to do from here on out. So do be sure to stick around for more content, and more importantly, I'll be taking a little bit of a breather here before eventually going to regularly scheduled HGN programming with regular subjects and whatsoever. I'll see you guys next time on September 6th.